The first time I heard it, I thought I was hallucinating. I was on my couch halfway through a lukewarm cup of coffee when a former client forwarded me a call recording and wrote, "Hey Greg, great talking last week. Sounded just like old times." I hadn't spoken to anyone from my old job in over a month. I'd been out since the beginning of Q2, officially on pause for medical leave, unofficially pushed out by leadership after budget cuts hit the customer experience team. My name is Greg Kraft, and for 12 years I was the literal voice of Tier 1 support at a fast-growing enterprise solutions company. I built the scripts, I trained the reps, I handled high-priority accounts when automation couldn't. And clients trusted me, not because of fancy titles or company swag, but because I listened. They liked how I explained things, how I treated them like people, not tickets. Now here I was, listening to a call I supposedly had just handled, even though I'd been hundreds of miles away recovering from surgery. I played the recording again. Same tone, same cadence, same calm reassurance I'd honed after years on the line. But it wasn't me. It was a voice clone. And it had just closed a service upgrade worth 5 figures. At first I thought it might have been an old recording, maybe something clipped from a past training module. But no. The voice greeted the client by name, reacted in real time, quoted an updated pricing sheet that didn't exist a month ago. This wasn't a pre-recorded message. It was live. An AI-generated version of my voice. Greg Kraft's voice. Talking, selling, building trust like I never left. I stared at the waveform on the screen, heart pounding. There it was. The very inflection I used when offering a courtesy extension. The friendly chuckle I'd become known for. The soft tone I adopted when clients were frustrated. It was flawless. Too flawless. I called the client back on my personal number. He picked up immediately. "Greg?" "Yeah," I said carefully. "I heard the recording." He laughed. "You sound different now." "I'm not calling from the office," I replied. "I'm not calling from work at all." A pause. "But we just talked." "No," I said. "You talked to a program." They recreated my voice. Silence again. This time, longer. And then he said, "Greg, that's messed up." I hung up and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just stunned. I'd left the company on good terms. No legal battles, no public drama, just a quiet offboarding with a promise that my team would carry on the systems I helped build. Never in that process did they say, "By the way, we'll be training an AI on your speech patterns." No disclosure. No opt-in. And it didn't make sense, even for a company that moved fast, where tech always came before policy. This was a leap. Cloning someone's voice isn't just bold, it's dangerous. I pulled up my work archives, dug through the policy documents, the offboarding flow. I even reread the exit contract they had me sign in a daze of post-surgery brain fog. Nothing. No mention of vocal licensing, no clause allowing synthetic representation. They had no right, which meant they didn't ask permission. They just used what they had. Old Zoom calls, training footage, recorded demo, and ran it all through a tool. I knew exactly which one. We had been testing it before I left. Vocal Chain Pro to Vocal, Chain was powerful, too powerful. It let companies synthesize voices using just a few hours of clean audio. You fed it recordings, picked a training model, and after that, it could generate real-time speech in any tone, with any script, with any emotional preset. We were supposed to use it for training simulations. That was my rule. That was in the pilot guidelines I personally wrote. No recreating real employees ever. But I was gone. And Reed, the VP of Ops who always thought tone was just fluff, had the keys now. He never liked that clients preferred talking to me over his chatbots. Guess this was his fix. I texted an old colleague from the dev team. Off the record. "Is my voice in the system?" She took 10 minutes to respond. Then, "Yeah, but you didn't hear it from me." And one more. They used it as the flagship model. Clients are responding better than ever. That was the moment the shock wore off. It wasn't flattery, it was theft. They didn't just copy me, they packaged me, stripped the humanity, kept the charm, and used my synthetic echo to close deals I never touched. Worse, clients thought it was me. They were making decisions based on a trust I'd built in good faith. Only now it wasn't even real. It was a replica, operating without my knowledge, without my ethics, without any accountability. I opened a blank file and started making notes. Not for legal, for truth, because I had a feeling this wasn't the only call, and something told me it wouldn't be the last. The next morning I did what I always do when something feels wrong. I got organized. I opened every single document from my exit package. The NDA, the severance paperwork, the thank you, letter from HR that read more like a pre-written form than a goodbye. I opened them all in parallel, scanning for keywords like AI, synthetic use, voice modeling, and likeness. Nothing. No clause. No disclaimer. Not even a vague reference. They hadn't covered themselves legally, because they hadn't thought they needed to. That's when I knew. They didn't think I'd ever find out. I dug into our internal documentation archive, which I still had guest access to through an old shared folder link. Everything looked the same. The policy decks I wrote, the AI implementation guidelines, the user training flows. But one new folder caught my eye, labeled VCP Assets, Greg Craft Variant. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even encrypted. They had created an entire file group under my name. Inside labeled audio snippets, clipped call examples, even my old video walkthroughs with text-to-speech notes attached. One file was titled Best Tone, Use in Upsells. Another, Empathy Module, Slow Version. They had dissected me, turned my communication style into data. This wasn't just a voice clone. This was a blueprint of my personality. I knew the tool behind it, Vocal Chain Pro. We'd been testing it in R&D for simulated training conversations. The idea was to create AI agents that sounded real enough, to help onboard new staff before they ever picked up a phone. That was the pitch I approved. I even recorded 5 base clips for prototyping, just to demonstrate tone variability. But I had clearly documented my limit. These samples are for internal sandbox simulation only. Under no condition may they be used for live customer interaction or future AI cloning of staff. I found that memo dated 6 months back and screenshot it. I even tagged the comment I left in the doc. Modeling real people is an ethics issue. Avoid at all costs. Apparently, they didn't just avoid my warning. They used it as a launchpad. To confirm what I suspected, I needed an insider. Someone who wouldn't be afraid to tell me the truth. I messaged Aisha, a lead on the AI enablement team. She and I used to grab coffee every other Thursday. She was smart, observant, and, like me, not a fan of Reed's management style. Hey, I wrote, random question. Are they using VCP in live support now? Her reply was instant. You didn't hear it from me, but yes, your voice is the default model for Tier 1 Premium. There it was. No spin. No denial. I felt sick. They told us you'd approved it. She added a moment later. I didn't. Figured. She told me that internally, the rumor was I had recorded new training materials right before I left, that I'd consulted remotely and provided the company rights to simulate Tier 1 support using my style. A total fabrication. Not just unethical, slanderous. I called a lawyer. Not because I was ready to sue, but because I needed clarity. Do I have any ground to stand on? I asked. He asked for my documentation. I sent everything. The exit paperwork, the AI ethics memo, the clone files, the client call sample. 2 days later, he replied with a short but encouraging message. They're walking a legal tightrope. You didn't give permission. You documented opposition, and they profited off your identity. He told me I had a case, especially if I could prove revenue tied directly to the clone. Find a call log, find a closed deal, find the client who thinks they talk to you. Then we talk again. I didn't need to look far. I already had one. The client who sent me the clip, a mid-tier SaaS firm who credited me with helping them choose an upgraded support package. The AI version of me. I opened a blank doc and typed one line at the top. I never signed off on this. And underneath it, I wrote the names of everyone who would soon need to read that sentence. I spent the next few days doing nothing but listening. Not to music, not to podcasts. Just calls. Support calls, demo calls, follow-ups. All routed through our Tier 1 system. The one I built, and now apparently the one where my ghost lived. Most of the recordings were accessible from a back-end training dashboard, probably meant for onboarding analysts. The permissions hadn't been locked down yet. Aisha had quietly shared the link, and I promised not to trace anything back to her. I listened to my voice, or rather, what they'd built from it, handle over a dozen scenarios. It was unsettling. The clone nailed my tone in almost every situation. When a frustrated client demanded to know why a service failed, let me first say, I totally get where you're coming from. I'd be upset too. I said something almost identical 2 years ago on a different account, when a client hesitated to renew their license. We value trust over pressure. Let's figure out what makes sense for you. A line I'd written into our sales manual, now turned into algorithmic persuasion. They hadn't just copied how I sounded, they had captured how I thought. And worse, the AI version of me was performing. Clients were signing deals, leaving 5-star reviews, asking for Greg to call back. Only Greg was never on the line. I wasn't sure what felt worse, being replaced or being replicated. At least if someone else had stepped into the role, I could have accepted it. Moved on. But this was identity laundering, and the system wasn't stopping. I traced a report buried in the analytics dashboard titled Top Performing Support Profiles, Month to Date. Number 1, Gcraft, AI tier. The bot version of me had closed more upgrade packages than any human rep on the team. I found a short internal case study prepared by the sales enablement team. It praised Greg AI as an example of natural trust synthesis, a phrase that made me want to punch a wall, and then I read this line. With minimal latency and no emotional fatigue, the Craft variant outperforms human engagement metrics by 36%. They'd reduced me to a measurable output, not a person, a variant. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. My voice, my methods, my name. Rerouted, rebranded, and rewritten without so much as a warning. The deeper I dug, the more I found. At least 5 clients had escalated conversations specifically asking to speak with Greg again. Each time, the request was processed by the AI scheduling tool, which just replayed a new voice session with different script prompts. No one told the clients they were speaking to an automated system. They thought it was me, just as warm, just as responsive, just as real. And then came the moment I didn't expect. A client, one of our oldest, someone I personally onboarded 5 years ago, sent a message through the contact portal. Greg, thank you for helping my team last week. Your advice changed everything. I shared it with my boss, and he was blown away. I read it 3 times, and then I replied, from my personal email, Hi, can you tell me exactly when we spoke? She responded within the hour. She included the date, time, and summary of what I had said. I hadn't spoken a single word that week. I asked her if she'd be open to a private call. She said yes, and I scheduled it. That night I didn't sleep. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was livid. This wasn't a glitch. This was policy. They were deceiving clients in my name, using an AI puppet built from my career, my empathy, my voice print, and no one had questioned it. Not legal, not HR, not even the people on the calls. It worked too well. And it wasn't just about the past anymore. This was about ownership, about identity, about what happens when a company decides that the best version of you is the one they can control. I ended the night by updating my case file, labeled every piece of audio, annotated the reports, time-stamped the requests, then added one last note at the bottom. They're building a business on my personality, without me. I waited until the end of the week to schedule the call, not because I wasn't ready, but because I needed to be calm. Strategic. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a test. The client I'd reached out to, Lauren, ran procurement for a mid-sized cybersecurity firm that had been with us since before we were even profitable. I knew her tone, I knew her pace, and I knew she didn't like being lied to. We'd talked dozens of times over the years. She once sent a handwritten thank you card after I stayed on a call with her team for 2 hours on a Sunday. She was loyal, but she wasn't sentimental. If something smelled wrong, she'd burn the whole thing down. The moment the call connected, her voice lit up. Greg! Finally, a real voice. I blinked. Excuse me? She laughed, but there was tension behind it. I've been wondering. You sound like you again. I let that hang a beat. Then I said, that's because this is actually me. Silence. Not confusion, not denial, just silence, like she was already putting the pieces together. Then she asked carefully, what do you mean, actually you? And I told her. I walked her through the whole thing. The clone voice, the unsanctioned use of my training files, the fabricated approval records, how I'd listened to over a dozen calls using my voice to close deals while I was on medical leave. I didn't sound angry. I didn't rant. I let her sit with it. The idea that every time she had asked for Greg Kraft, she got a program instead. A simulation that made her feel like the company still cared, when it was really just responding to a prompt. She stayed quiet for a long time. Then she said, that explains a lot. I asked her to clarify. She said the last few interactions felt weird, like I was rushing her, selling her things I used to say weren't necessary, using phrases like optimize your contract footprint, which she said I'd never said before. I thought maybe you'd changed, she admitted. No, I said. I was unconscious in a hospital. I sent her a package, audio logs of both the real me and the clone, side-by-side transcripts, the AI system ID and generation timestamp, a screen recording of the file named G-Craft Variant, Upsell Protocol. She called me back 30 minutes later. I showed it to my legal team, she said, and they're furious. Turns out her company had a clause in our master service agreement, no synthetic communication in place of real staff without explicit notice. The clause had been written 2 years ago during another AI rollout she'd pushed back on. Now it was a live wire. They breached, she said plainly, and not just with you. If they did this to your voice, who knows what else they're fabricating? I didn't have to answer. She was already in motion. That single call triggered a chain reaction I couldn't have predicted. Lauren sent a formal complaint to our company's client relations office. Then she forwarded the evidence to her company's legal counsel, and because she was who she was, she didn't keep it quiet. 3 other clients reached out to me within a week. Each had noticed changes in how I interacted with them. Odd language, faster pitches, strange pauses, they all thought I'd just gotten tired or jaded. No one had considered that they were talking to software. Once they saw the proof, the tone shifted. Anger, betrayal, legal scrutiny. The company scrambled. I wasn't inside anymore, but I could feel it from the outside. The press hadn't picked it up yet, but internally they were drowning. Lauren's firm threatened to terminate their contract unless they issued a full review of all synthetic communication practices, and publicly addressed the Greg Kraft situation. My name wasn't just back in the system, it was everywhere. I wasn't inside the company anymore, but I still had eyes on the ground. People started messaging me. Quietly, carefully. Hey, Greg, you seeing what's happening in the VoiceBot review channel? Someone mentioned your name in an emergency compliance thread. Reed hasn't posted in 3 days. The center wasn't holding. Reed, the exec who had pushed the voice automation initiative and given the go-ahead to train my AI clone, had gone completely silent. Meanwhile, a senior manager in client trust was put on temporary leave. A newly hired PR coordinator was seen crying in the lobby, and nobody knew why. But I did. Lauren's firm had delivered the first hit. A full legal notice accusing the company of deceptive client representation and unauthorized biometric exploitation. The term she used in the letter? Digital identity fraud. The letter wasn't public, but everyone treated it like it would be. Slack messages got deleted. Folders renamed. Internal decks redacted. They weren't preparing a defense. They were preparing an escape route. 2 more firms followed Lauren's lead. One demanded full logs of every call conducted using any form of automated persona or voice modeling. The other froze their next quarterly payment, citing breach of contract. This wasn't just legal noise anymore. This was financial damage. And the board noticed. That's when I got a call, not from PR, not from HR, but from the office of the CEO himself. His assistant sounded shaken. Greg, we'd like to talk. Off the record. You still in town? Part of me wanted to say no, let them drown, but the other part, the one that had built that team from nothing, wanted to see it through. I said yes. The meeting wasn't in the main building. It was in a side conference room at an off-site co-working space. Discreet, neutral, non-branded. Inside, the CEO, the general counsel, and Reed. Reed looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Unshaven. Pale. Palms flat against the table like he was trying not to slide off it. The CEO began softly. "We know about the voice clone. We know what happened." He paused. We didn't know how deep it went. I didn't respond. I just let the silence grow heavy. They'd brought me here for a reason. "We're prepared to resolve this quietly," the CEO continued. An apology. Removal of the system. A formal statement acknowledging the use of synthetic voice in a pilot setting. He looked at me. "And a generous package, if you're willing to keep this off the record." That's when I spoke. "There's no amount of money that makes this right." I laid out my terms. Simple, non-negotiable. Complete deletion of the Greg Kraft voice model. Every file, every training sample, every trace. Public acknowledgement that the company used synthetic voice without consent, and that it has been permanently discontinued. Written notification to every client who interacted with my AI clone, explaining what they actually spoke to. A permanent ban on any future training of AI using employee voices without signed, informed consent. Reed shifted. The CEO looked like he'd swallowed a lemon, but the general counsel nodded. "It's, reasonable." I pushed my final chip forward. "If I see my voice, or anything that sounds like it, in the wild again, I will sue. I have the logs, I have the model ID, I have receipts." They knew I wasn't bluffing. The meeting ended without a handshake, just a quiet nod. And the next day the statement went live. The fallout was quick. Reed resigned to pursue other opportunities. The AI integration team was dissolved. All Vocal Chain Pro usage was suspended. I was contacted by multiple tech blogs asking for my side. I declined. The statement spoke loud enough. In the span of a week, a company that once bragged about being at the forefront of client automation was now drafting new ethical guidelines. And this time I was helping write them, not for them. For everyone else watching. Because if this could happen to me, it could happen to anyone. I didn't walk out of that last meeting with a trophy or a press release. There were no celebrations, no LinkedIn posts, no viral videos about corporate justice. Just a signed document in a manila folder, quietly acknowledging that I'd been right, and that they had crossed a line they never should have touched. That's the thing about identity. It's not just your face or your name or the login credentials you use. It's the weight of your presence, the way your voice lands in someone's ear when they're having a terrible day. The trust that builds over years of saying, "I've got you," and actually meaning it. They tried to recreate that with lines of code and audio samples. They tried to condense it into latency-free responses and empathy modules. But what they made wasn't me. It was a shadow. And that shadow almost replaced me entirely. Now it was gone. I had watched the deletion logs myself, line after line of voice files being purged, my inflections, my cadence, my jokes, all erased from their servers like they'd never existed. It should have felt like closure, but it didn't. Not yet. The closure came weeks later, in a place I didn't expect, a small business roundtable in Portland. I'd been invited by a startup founder I'd helped years ago, back before my voice was famous in the worst way. She was building a platform for ethical AI training, and she wanted me to speak, not as a victim, not as a case study, but as a human. The room wasn't big, maybe 40 people. Founders, engineers, product designers, a few lawyers, all of them facing the same moral storm I'd walked through. How far is too far? Who owns a voice once it's digitized? What does consent even look like in the age of synthetic reality? I told them my story, start to finish. No dramatics, no anger, just facts. How a company I trusted used my voice to keep profits flowing. How clients believed they were hearing me when I wasn't even conscious. And how the people in charge, the ones who should have known better, chose efficiency over ethics. When I finished, no one clapped. Not out of disrespect, but because they were stunned. They weren't looking at a lecture, they were looking at their future. After that talk, people started reaching out. A team in Canada asked if I'd review their AI consent model. A compliance officer in San Diego wanted me to help write new guidelines for voice-based service delivery. Even a couple of the interns from my old company messaged me saying, "Thank you for not staying quiet." I hadn't realized it, but something had shifted. The same voice they tried to steal was now shaping how others protected their own. I started taking consulting calls, one at a time, not big corporate gigs, just people trying to do better. And every time I hit join meeting and they heard my voice, the real one, they smiled. Not because it was perfectly smooth, not because it was optimized for tone, but because it was mine. Cracks and all, I still keep a copy of the old AI clip, the one that fooled a room full of executives and sold 20K worth of upgrades in 3 minutes. Sometimes I play it back just to remind myself how close I came to disappearing, and then I open a new doc. I write something real, from scratch, no script, no bot, just breath and thought and truth. Because in the end they can replicate sound, they can copy structure, but they can't synthesize integrity, and that's the part of my voice they'll never own.